Shalom, Israel. How y'all doing today? This is Yuda. Today we are going to talk about time. You know, I've done quite a few lessons on the new moon. And then I was studying some things about it today, and I ran across something very interesting. First, I want to tell y'all that I made some minor errors. And the reason that I made those errors was because the manipulation of time by man. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is they have mangled our history, the history of Scripture, everything. They just made a big mess out of it. And it's no wonder we can never agree on anything. I remember teaching that there were 12 hours in a day. Well, that was incorrect. Neither is there 12 hours in the night. That was also incorrect. And I discovered something that was written by Charles Francis Potter. So I'm going to read to you what is written here. And I think we're going to open our eyes a little bit wider as we discover more truth about this whole thing. So let's get started, shall we? Time in Bible Times by Charles Francis Potter. You move into a different time, world from ours when you open your Bible. You find yourself in a much more leisurely atmosphere where exact time measurements are unknown and the calendar a very casual affair. A modern city dweller living in this mechanized age when minutes are important and when speed, contest, and radio have accustomed us to split-second timing. Is surprised to learn that the words minute and second are not found anywhere in the Bible. That blew the top of my head off. And it opened up a lot of things that I wasn't quite understanding. And I think that when I'm done with this, you're going to have a better understanding also. The patriarchs of the Old Testament and even the disciples of the so-called Jesus, I wanted to edit that out, y'all, but I'm going to read it as he wrote it. The patriarchs of the Old Testament and even the disciples of Jesus were time wealthy and had no use for such small change. When hours, days, weeks, months, and years are mentioned in the scriptures, they seldom correspond exactly to our division of time with the same names. Neither the word calendar nor the word clock is used in the Bible. Only one sundial is mentioned, and that belonged to a king. It was on this dial of King Ahaz that the prophet Isaiah is said to have caused the shadow to move backward 10 degrees as a sign to Hezekiah. The story itself bears eloquent testimony to the naive ideas about time which then prevailed. Nobody in Isaiah's day realized that the earth would have no reverse in its motion if the shadow on the dial were to move backwards. No one even dreamed that the result of such a reversal, had it really occurred, would have been a tidal wave that would have wiped Isaiah, King Hezekiah, the sundial, and all the inhabitants of Palestine out of existence. Today, time marches on inevitably by regular measured steps. But in the Bible days, for all that even the wisest men knew, time might loiter, stop altogether, or even go backwards. There was nothing incongruous to them in the thought of Joshua commanding the sun to stand still until Israel was avenged of her enemies. They were blissfully unaware of the catastrophe to the whole solar system which would have ensued. Indeed, the very idea of measuring time with precision was quite foreign to the ancient Oriental mind. In dating an event, exactness did not matter. Again and again we read, in the process of time it came to pass, or after a time he returned, or when he had been there a long time. The great lifespans attributed to the patriarchs, sometimes over 900 years, show another example of carelessness of time measurement. Probably we should drop a cipher to get the correct age. Otherwise, we strain our credulity to believe that Noah was 500 years old when he begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The concept of time itself, in an abstract sense, was very vague in the minds of those who wrote the Bible. Certainly, the translators have had their troubles in trying to make intelligible to us the peculiar ideas of time and duration of time, which they found in Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek originals. Young's Concordance lists 16 different words, 10 Hebrew and 6 Greek, which are translated time or times. The word hour does not occur in the Old Testament until we come to the book of Daniel, one of the last books written, and the only reason we find it in Daniel is because of a poor translation. The ancient Jews never thought in terms of hours. In the 5 places in Daniel where our Bible have the word hour, the Aramaic word so translated is shah, which means literally look or glance, and should have been rendered moment or in the twinkling of an eye. For instance, in the King James Version, Daniel chapter 3 verse 6 reads, "And whoso falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." In Dr. Moffat's new translation, in place of the same hour, the word instantly is correctly used. When we come to the New Testament, we find the word hour often enough, but it is not the hour that we know or that we now know. The length of time it indicates varies greatly. It may refer to an instant, it may refer to 45 minutes, it may refer to an hour or an hour and a quarter, or a period of 3 hours, or a day, or even a season. The reason for these strange variations is the fact that during the time when the New Testament was being written, the word hour was in the process of evolution. It was still in a fluid state. Various meanings of the word were contending with each other for popular acceptance. Greek, Roman, and Jewish ideas of time measurement were prevalent in Palestine at the same time. The word hour comes from the Greek word hora. The horae or hora were the 3 mythological goddesses of the seasons, spring, summer, and winter. This was before autumn was recognized as a season. Where was I at? This was before autumn was recognized as a season. Their names were Eunomia, Dyke, and Arene, meaning good, order, justice, and peace, guardians of the orderly succession of the process of nature, Hora therefore meant season, in a very general sense, almost synonymous with a time. It was simply a measurable lapse of time with a beginning and an end, but with no uniform length of duration. That ancient Greek meaning of the word persisted into the New Testament times, even after hora came to be used also to mean a division of the day. Consequently, when the translators came across the word hora, they found it very difficult to determine what English word to use. In other words, to substitute. Several times they translated hora as day, several other times they rendered it season, and they were correct in so doing, but in some verses where hora should have been translated moment or instant, they rendered it hour. Even in the many places in the New Testament where the word hora is used to indicate a period of time somewhat corresponding to our modern hour, it should be understood by the Bible reader that the New Testament hour varied greatly in length. There were astronomers then, to be sure, who had carefully worked out the exact length of the day from the observation of the stars and the equinoxes, and had divided the day into 24 equal parts or hours, like the ones we use today. These they measured by a clever mechanical device which they called the clepsydra, literally the water stealer and primitive forerunner of the clock. But the common people of New Testament times, in their homes and in businesses, knew nothing of a 24-hour equal hour of the day of 24 equal hours. To them, the day was period between sunrise and sunset, and that was divided into 12 equal parts called hours. Of course, the hours were therefore much longer in the summer than in the winter. In midwinter, their hour was equal to only 3/4 of one of hours, and in midsummer was as long as our hour and a quarter. But in their leisurely method of living, they did not worry about such small matters. Practically, too, Jesus' contemporary did not even bother very much with separate hours. They used mostly the third, sixth, and ninth hours, meaning mid-forenoon, noon, or mid-afternoon. As a matter of fact, the first, second, fourth, fifth, eighth, and 12th hours are never mentioned in the New Testament at all. The 11th hour is referred to twice, but in the same story, and the 7th and 10th hours are mentioned but once each. And in half the places where any hour is mentioned, it is prefaced by the word about. About the ninth hour is a common phrase and meant evidently along some time in the afternoon. The night was divided into watches. In Old Testament times, there were three: the evening watch, the middle watch, and the morning watch. That usage carried over into the New Testament, but the Roman four-watch night was also coming into use. There is an interesting example in Mark 13, verse 35, where all four watches are named. Watch ye, therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh, at even, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning. The week is not very important in the Bible. It is mentioned only 26 times, while the month is referred to 250 times, the year 834 times, and the day 2,352 times. You would think that the week would be important because it is uh, popularly supposed that the seventh-day week was ordained by the Most High himself when he created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, thus establishing the Sabbath. But it is extremely probable that the Jews adopted the 7-day week, including the Sabbath, from the Babylonians, who probably got it from the 4 phases of the moon. Scholars are inclined to think that the Hebrew week was not derived from the creation narrative, but vice versa. In the Old Testament, the word for week is Shabuah, from Sheba, the Hebrew word for 7. In the New Testament, it is Sabbaton, or Sabbatah, meaning from Sabbath to Sabbath. The days of the week were not named like our Sunday, Monday, etc., but were numbered, save the 7th, the Sabbath. Since the week was also named the Sabbath, there is some confusion in certain passages. The afternoon of the 6th day, the Gregorian Friday afternoon, had a name of its own. The preparation, since at that time the Jews were preparing for the Sabbath, or our Sunday, was known as the morrow after the Sabbath, or as the first day of the week, until the very end of the Bible, where we find the first use of a new name for it, which later became very popular in the apostolic Christian church. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 10, the author says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. Even today, many Christians prefer that name to Sunday. When they consider an unwarranted concession to heathen sun worship, it was on the first day of the week that the Bible says that JC rose from the dead, so that day was chosen as particularly his. The Hebrew word for month was Kodesh, which literally meant new moon, and was used because the month extended from one new moon to the next. It is difficult for the amateur student of the Bible to know just what time of year is meant when any month is mentioned, because there were in the Bible 3 different ways of designating the months. 2 sets of month names besides the use of numbers, and even when numbers were used, the first month was not our January, but the latter part of March and the first part of April. Still further to confuse the student, the first month of the sacred year was the 7th month of the civil year. The oldest set of month names used in the Bible was Canaanite origin, the agricultural in character. Only 4 of these are mentioned. Abib, which means sprouting or budding, was the first month and began with the new moon of March or April, not January. It was the month of the spring equinox and was traditionally the time when the Jews came out of Egypt, the Passover time, or our Easter, their Easter, not ours. It is mentioned 4 times in Exodus and twice in Deuteronomy. Ziph, the 2nd month, was the month of flowering, and it is mentioned twice in 1 Kings. Ethanim, the 7th month, named only once in 1 Kings, means perennial, and was so named because it was the dry month, corresponding to our September and October, when only the newer failing springs and streams flow. Bull, the 8th month, also mentioned only once in 1 Kings, was named for the ancient rain god of the Canaanites, because in that month the fall drought ended and the rains came. When the Jews went into Babylon in exile in the 6th century BC, they dropped the old names for the months and used numbers. But when they returned from exile, they brought back with them the Babylonian month names. It was no longer Abib, or the first month, but Nisan, named for the Babylonian god of spring. One would have thought that the priest of the Most High would have resented that. Then followed in the order Iyar or Sivan, Tammuz, Ab, Elul, Tishri, Markishvan, Kislev, Tebeth, Shabbat, and Adar. Of these 12 names, only 7 are mentioned in the Bible: Nisan, Sivan, Elul, Kislev, Tebeth, Shabbat, and Adar. The Hebrew year, or Shana, was thus made up of 12 lunar months. But since the month from the new moon to new moon was only 29 and a half days, the lunar year contained only 354 days, and some sort of intercalation was necessary to bring it into line with the solar year of 365 and a quarter days. This was done by occasionally adding an extra month after the last month, which was Adar, February and March. And this extra month was named We Adar, or second Adar. The Babylonian cycle, or of introducing the intercalary month 7 times in 19 years was adopted. But the calculating became so complicated that ordinary people simply accepted the official figures announced by the Sanhedrin, or Great Council. Of course, in the New Testament times, the Roman influence brought the Julian calendar into the attention of the Jews and Christians, but the old customs continued to prevail in Palestine. It seemed a betrayal of their religion for Jews to accept the Roman calendar, and the non-Jewish Christians adopted themselves to a situation as best that they could. There is no evidence in the New Testament the Julian calendar had been adopted by Christians. The old Jewish calendar of Bible days, with its lunar year and complicated intercalation, is still in use today as the sacred calendar of the synagogues, although the modern Jew perforce uses the Gregorian calendar in its business affairs. It would be a great step forward if both Jews and Christians were to adopt the proposed perpetual world calendar of equal quarters and relocate their holy days accordingly. So, when you look at all of this, it's no wonder that when you try to teach the new moon and the creation calendar, that you raise so many arguments because they have changed so much throughout our history. Sometimes I wonder if it's not best that we just stay away from the book and meditate on the Most High and do what is right according to His will and wait on Him. Because I believe that it's only when He shows up that this mess is going to be straightened out. I don't believe that it's going to happen anytime before then. I really don't. And that's not to say that you all should do the same. I mean, we each have our own thoughts and our own feelings and opinions about certain things. So no one person should be accountable for another. Your choice is your choice. My choice is my choice. And I'm not saying that I'm going to do this. But when you look at how we argue with each other back and forth about certain scriptures and timelines, but let's just take a moment to think. When the Most High did His creation, He never mentioned anything about hours, seconds, or minutes. So how do we determine when the Sabbath day or when day itself began? You know what I found out? It's not sunrise. It is the first crack of dawn. And if you figure that time, which is around 5 o'clock in the morning, so if you figure 5 o'clock in the morning, starting the Sabbath day or the start of the day, and then here the sun sets and it's dark at around 7 o'clock. Well, that's 14 hours. That's 14 hours. So that means there's 28 hours in the day. No, that's not what it's saying. Basically, the way the Most High created this, there was no timekeeping. And if you pay attention to how the earth cycles, it's ever undetermined until it finishes a complete cycle. So is the same for the moon. So when I looked at this and thought about it, it makes perfect sense that the day starts at daybreak, dawn. I've saw dawn in the Old Testament, but I've never seen sunrise or so the crack of dawn starts your day. And at night, when there is no more light, That is the end of the day. So we're not counting 14 hours. They didn't count like that. The Sabbath day started at the break of dawn and it ended when there was no more light left in the day. If you keep it that way, I don't see how you could go wrong. Now, as far as the other things I taught about the new moon, it's all correct. The only problem was the hours. That's where my error was. So I'm humbly coming before you, telling you that was an error. We cannot keep hours for the Sabbath day. It keeps itself, and it's purely legible when you think about it. If you start at the crack of dawn and end at the end of day when there's no light, that is the end of your day. So that is your one day. And the same thing applies to the night. But I wanted to share this, guys, with you all, just so y'all could see, how much has been done and how the Torah never mentioned anything about hours except when you get to Daniel. And like it said, that was a mistranslation. It never should have read hour. And there's so many mistranslations, even in the Torah. So it's pretty risky and scary that when you're trying to read to acquire your salvation, you have to read through the tangled web of man's errors and deceit. It makes it really hard to enjoy what you read. Now, I'm not saying all of it is that way, but they messed up a lot of it. And just so y'all know, I'm never going to stop looking. I'm going to continue to look until I got this right. And I may never do it. It may not. But you know what? The Most High will not strike you down as long as you're making an honest attempt. It's when you are not trying. Think about it. If you're trying, think about it this way. If your kid was trying to do something you taught them and you knew they were giving it all they had, are you going to punish them? No. And I don't believe the Most High will punish us, but we have to be honestly, faithfully, truthfully seeking His truth. And He may reveal a little at a time, He may reveal a lot at a time, but we have to let Him do it. And to clean up the mess that these heathens, I'm not going to call them men because Genesis didn't call them men. Genesis called them beasts. And we know who their father is. So I'm not going to try to clean up the beast mess. I believe that job is for the Most High. And I believe that He is the only one that can clean that mess up. I hope this helps or enlightens you, Israel. Until I return, I'm going and seek out some more. Shalom and much love, family. I appreciate all of you. Shalom.